Hello and welcome to episode number 172 of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I am Kellen the Red Tank, joined as always by Mark and Neelan.
Hello.
Orange and green. Green and orange. Probably orange and green.
Well, some might disagree.
We have a de facto Board Game Barrage color order, don't we? So it would be green and then orange.
Well,
yeah, de facto.
Define de facto.
We have to start this episode with a huge thank you. A huge thank you to our audience who supported us in the Board Game Geek Awards. We got second runner-up as the best board game podcast of the year.
Which is amazing. Which is awesome. To think 3 years ago, we were just a trio of schlubs with no podcast, just hanging out, playing board games, and now we're titans.
I think it's also tempting from the outside to be like, oh, maybe there's a foregone conclusion. But we were like literally on tenterhooks. Like we did not have confidence that we were going to place. And I'm so excited when we saw the results and we're like, oh man, we did it.
Yeah. Gun to my head, I would have not thought we were going to place. I mean, we were talking about this, but yeah, I did not think we were going to place.
I think that the best news of all is that there's a secret hidden tank on both the first runner-up, This Game is Broken, a fantastic board game comedy panel, which has Miss Paula Deming, one Orchid Tank, who has guested on our show before, and the winner, So Very Wrong About Games, with our friend, the Black Tank, and one other. Also our friend, but does not have tank status. Also a very, very good board game podcast.
Yes.
So we are grateful. If this is your first time listening, thank you for jumping in. Thank you again to everyone who voted for us. Thank you for supporting the show. It really does mean the world to us.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to sort of underline this because Kellen texted me when we got the news. And honestly, it was like, I'm trying to think of what it was akin to me. It was sort of like finding out and this is I always go with a sports analogy, like finding out your team had won the championship without having like even known the game was on. It was weird. It's like he sent me like, we're on third place, and I was just jumping up and down in my living room, and like I was super, super excited. So it really meant a lot.
There's this, like, I remember 5 years ago seeing, or 10 years ago even, seeing who's winning these awards on the Golden Geeks and, like, going to a convention and, like, seeing Tom Vassell or Sam Healy out of the court. And, like, my heart was beaten.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And obviously we have not ascended to those high heights of the Dice Tower, but it is definitely different than 2 episodes in when all you can hear in the episode is the sound of my very inexpensive refrigerator. Today on the Board Game Barrage podcast, we are going to be talking about 3 design elements, and we are going to be conclusively concluding whether those are design problems or player problems. We are going to be talking about Kingmaking, we're going to be talking about alpha gamers and co-op games, we're going to be talking about player elimination. Are those design problems or are they player problems? But before we do that, we're going to cover the games that we have been playing this week. Neelan is going to start us off with a hot take on the hottest game, Red Rising, the latest Stonemaier games. I will be talking about an even hotter game, the hottest of the hottest from BGA, Via Magica. It's the Magica with the CK at the end. It's like my magic just ends in C, you know?
Right.
No K required.
Actually, weirdly enough, just the CA does look weird. Like I'm so much more used to seeing the CKA.
And if anybody's used to seeing the word magic, it is.
Right, exactly. If anyone is an expert on magic in all forms and spellings.
Right.
And Mark is going to close us out with his thoughts on Alma Mater, a academia-themed, and I say that with all quotes intended, an academia-themed Eurogame. All right, Neelan, why don't you kick us off with your thoughts and feelings and whatever else you want to say about Red Rising.
Red Rising is the latest game from Stonemaier Games. It is designed by Jamie Stegmaier and Alexander Schmidt. And if you're not familiar with the Red Rising license, this is a series of sort of high-action, page-turning sci-fi books. It's a series I actually am quite a big fan of. We'll come back to how well it fits thematically in the game later, but the premise of the game is primarily a card game. I think it probably is worth mentioning up front that this is heavily inspired by Fantasy Realms. I say that because if you're familiar with Fantasy Realms, that might just iron out everything I'm about to describe. So in Red Rising, you start with a hand of 5 cards, and your turn most of your turns, I should say, consist of deploying a card to one of the 4 areas of the game. Each card has an ability when you deploy it. We'll talk about those abilities in a second. Then you are going to take a card from one of the other 3 areas. So not where you deploy to, from one of the other 3 zones. And that is the basic premise of your turn. When you take a card, you're also getting the bonus that corresponds to each of these 4 locations. Now, the cards in the game not only have an ability that happens when you deploy them, they also have a scoring condition. They have what's called like a core value, which is basically their flat points value at the end of the game, and then some additional scoring criteria at the bottom. So, for example, a card might say, if this card is paired with like an orange card in your hand, then it's going to be worth an additional 10 points. If this card is with an obsidian, then it's going to be worth less points. So every card has specific criteria, and those can be as broad as I'm describing, where you either want certain colors in your hand, or very specific. A card might say, if Darrow, a very specific named card, is in your hand, it's worth more or less points. There are 112 unique cards in this game. Everyone has a fairly unique ability. They all come in like broad classifications, I would say, and also like a unique scoring criteria. So I will say right off the bat that those are very interestingly tied to the characters that they correspond to. Every card is a character in the Red Rising universe. And if you're a fan of the license, you're going to look at the ability, you're going to look at the scoring criterion and like have this wry knowledge about why it makes sense thematically, why that card has that ability, why it doesn't want to be with its mortal enemy, or why it does want to be with their love interest, for example. At this point, I want to talk very quickly about the bonuses that you get. When you take a card from the table, you're either going to get one of 4 different bonuses, and these are either going to be like collecting helium for points, competing on this area majority zone called the Institute, moving up your marker on the fleet track, or stealing this sovereign token that is going to be worth X amount of points at the end of the game. And that is the entirety of the crux of the game. Play a card, use its ability, pick up a card, so you're sort of massaging hand management style your hand of cards to maximize the scoring potential of them at the end of the game, while also collecting the appropriate bonuses to score off of. The one thing I want to say off the bat, as we sort of start moving into like my criticisms of this game, is all of the bonuses feel a little bit perfunctory. In my recorded games of this, which are now, maybe 5 or 6 different games of this, I sort of did a little quick tally of every single player's scores out of the bonuses, and the range was pretty narrow. It was like a 20-point swing between the lowest bonus score versus the highest, which is, in a game that scores around 200 points, just a pretty thin margin. So it seems to me that the majority of your scoring comes from your hand of cards in the game. And that's totally fine. The reason I want to emphasize this is because I think that if you're familiar with Fantasy Realms, which I want to clarify at this point that I have not played, this is going to be one of the major additions to the game. The idea of every location that you can pull a card from being tied to a scoring bonus, and have this additional allotment of points in addition to the cards you have in your hand at the end of the game. And it doesn't feel like it amounts to much at the end of the game. So this is like probably one of the elements that struck me as the most perfunctory and the most sort of tacked on to the game. And I was surprised to find that, like, okay, this is one of the major additions that you've made from Fantasy Realms. The other main thing is these cards having abilities, which is not the case in Fantasy Realms. But those abilities are kind of either extremely useful if you get them at the right time, or a lot of the time they felt just worthless. I'm not going to lie, I would often play a card to the board and its ability would say, oh, move a card from one column to another. I just wouldn't care. I would just move one card over, not really bothered about why I was doing it. That's not to say that there aren't occasional times where this is interesting. There are times where that manipulation of cards between the zones is important, just more often than not, it isn't. And that kind of thread of just feeling like I wasn't that invested in a lot of what I was doing, unfortunately, struck me through most of Red Rising. I kind of felt like I wasn't that invested in even the cards I was picking up, the cards I was putting down because I didn't care about the abilities, or even the bonuses I was collecting. And that's a large chunk of the game to just not feel that invested in. At this point, I kind of want to say that the thing that I do like about this game a lot is I think that if you are a fan of the license, you are going to get that kick out of seeing these cards, seeing these characters, seeing the way that their abilities tie in thematically, seeing the beautiful card art. These cards are gorgeous. Every card is colored according to the color of the class of the character. In the universe of Red Rising, people are genetically identified by a color. So like you have bright orange cards with these orange frames. The gold cards in the collector's edition at least have like inlaid gold filigree. Like they're beautiful cards. The art and all the characters, it might not be as I imagine the characters, but it's beautiful, beautiful card art. I just can't help but feel that if this game was half the price and just a card game alone, I would have a much easier time recommending it. I feel like a lot of the stuff that makes this a big box production doesn't necessarily add to the game, or even thematically for that matter. The cards are the star here. All the other stuff just feels perfunctory. It's just not the Red Rising game that I would have wanted, ultimately.
When you're talking about how the cards are sort of the main event and the rest of the stuff is perfunctory, are you saying that to the extent that they're not only sort of perfunctory but also sort of detracting from the rest of the game? Or because, obviously production is part of the draw of a game. Does it go from being like a positive aspect to a negative because it's in the way?
So it adds more busy work. The card system becomes not just play a card, take a card, right? It's put a card to a specific location, do some manipulation, take a thing. But all of those extra steps feel like extra steps. So I would say that like from a mechanics design perspective, it does actually feel like it's just rules stuff added on, like procedure added onto a game that doesn't feel that rewarding, which is in some ways ironic because I do feel like the intent of it is like, oh, you're always getting a thing. You're doing a thing, you're getting a bonus. Like the intent is that sort of very base manipulation of like, ooh, getting stuff. But that doesn't work on me where I kind of feel like, oh, I'd rather just this wasn't here and we had a simpler game in the process. We often talk about in Board Game Barrage about this idea that a game that is simpler mechanically but still getting 95% of the way towards the experience is something that we find valuable. And this doesn't pass that test, in my mind.
So is it good for being a licensed game? Because I am a Red Rising fan, and so when you were saying some of the names of the characters, I was like, okay. I got excited. But I don't have any particular love of Fantasy Realms, and it sounds like it's a middling card game is essentially what it is that has a too expensive production. So is it good enough for Red Rising diehard and no one else you would recommend pick it up, essentially? But even you as a Red Rising fan are a little like, eh.
Well, I mean, I think that's exactly it. Like, I am a big fan of these books. I played this with two other players who are both very familiar with the books. And we all had a kick of like, the Darrow card comes out, who is like the protagonist of the books, essentially, right? And that feels like a big fun moment. You're like, oh, I wonder like who this character interacts with. Like you start to see like, oh, this character wants this character and that's fun. You get annoyed when people take the characters you like. Like that is all baked into it being a licensed game, right? But to answer that question, should you buy this on the basis of being a Red Rising fan? No, absolutely not. Like I am a Red Rising fan and I think I'm done with this game. I just don't think it's good enough to continue to be in my collection despite being a huge fan of the license.
Well, this is a win-win-win for Board Game Barrage because you're going to be letting me borrow that game as the second biggest Red Rising fan here. So I got it for $0. And then when I'm done with it, we're going to give it to Mark. He's going to sell that off, make us some money.
There it is.
Put it in the company coffers. We've got $29 and a couple of old board games in there, huh?
We could double the coffers.
We could double the coffers with one champion edition. This is the one that has like all the metallic...
Yes.
Collectors is very cool looking, but like hard on the eyes.
Yeah, I think that's both a little bit overblown. Like obviously colorblindness, accessibility notwithstanding, I do think the colors are, with a handful of exceptions, like the colors are mostly fine. They're not great. They're not as distinct as they should be. Otherwise, I think the collector's edition craft is nice. It's just, it feels a little bit inessential. That is Red Rising by Stonemaier Games.
All right. Thank you, Neelan. I got a chance to play a new version of a game that I think... Am I the one who likes Augustus the best?
I think so.
I like Augustus.
Rise of Augustus is a bingo for gamers where you are trying to complete cards and complete sets, and the different cards give you special abilities, and there's things you're looking for on those cards. But ultimately, it's derived and driven by a bingo mechanic where someone holds up a symbol, and then everyone covers up a spot on their cards that does that. So Via Magica is sort of like Baby's first Rise of Augustus. So we take the game, we make it a little simpler, we bring the theme down. So similar to Alma Mater that Mark will be covering shortly, Via Magica is also about academia. It is about students competing to become junior mages in their crystallization exam. So that's important. So Via Magica takes Rise of Augustus, it strips out some of the set collecting, some of the things that you're looking for on the cards. It's very, very simple. You've got a bag. It's got air, water, earth, life, fire, shadow, and wild cards in it. You pull one out, you shout water, everyone tries to cover up a water symbol. You have 3 cards in front of you. That's all you're doing, trying to complete those. And then you draft a new card. And so when you draft cards, the decisions that you're making are like, I already have a lot of water on one of my cards, so I want to go for one that has some shadows on it. But there's only one shadow, so it's going to be hard to get that card. Each card in Via Magica has some sort of special power or end of game victory point bonus. So you may complete a card that now makes it so every time fire is drawn from the bag, you can fill that in as a wild, which is awesome. One of the ways that the game restricts you is you actually only have 7 crystal markers to fill in those 3 cards. So once you get to 7, if you haven't completed a card, you're actually going to have to move it off of something that you've marked off in order to kind of complete another card. It also has a fun race component, which is that once you've completed these cards, you can select to say, okay, I'm going to get the victory points for having completed 2 cards first. Or you can wait, then get it when it's 3 cards. The first person to get 3 cards can get it. But once you've taken one of those cards, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, you cannot take another one. So there's always this question of, am I closer than them? Looking around the table. I was pleasantly surprised by Via Magica. I will say that this game does not do well on Board Game Arena, which is the only place that I have played it. A lot of the fun of Rise of Augustus and Via Magica is that moment where you draw something out, everyone is chanting, they really want a specific symbol, and then, boom, it's water, what you needed. People accuse you of cheating in our groups. That moment does not exist on BGA, that moment where you get a bingo, and according to Via Magica, you were supposed to shout, Incantatum? Incantatum?
That's Neelan.
Yeah, that's perfect. You nailed that. Have you studied magic before?
No, Neelan, you have studied magic before. There's this interesting thing, right? Because this has also been done, the bingo mechanic has also been done in Ecos, a more recent game that's even more complicated than Rise of Augustus. So in a way, we have sort of this trio now, and Via Magica and Rise of Augustus are much closer together than Ecos, but I still think there's something very radically fun hidden in the it's bingo, but it's not for board gamers. About a quarter of the way through this game, I was like, oh no, they took out everything good. I do think this is much shorter, which I think Rise of Augustus sometimes felt like it would go just a little bit too long, and it's simpler. I would actually really like to play them back-to-back to decide which one I would prefer to keep. It is much lighter, so hardcore gamers probably will want to stay with Rise of Augustus, though hardcore gamers may not want to play Rise of Augustus thanks to the aforementioned bingo mechanism. What do you guys want to know about Via Magica?
I actually really like Rise of Augustus as like a game between games or a filler sort of type game. This does feel lighter, you're saying?
Totally. It removes some of the options and some of the cooler abilities. It's definitely a streamlined reduction.
Because for as much as I like Rise of Augustus as like a real quick in-between game or game to start the night, it's still not a game that I would feel comfortable like teaching to, say, my parents or non-gamers. Is this a game that would reach that level? Like, is this a game that you could bring to a family get-together and feel like people would be able to get with it?
I do believe yes. Yeah. And that was my thought, like, hey, I could put this in my bag and get my mom to play. You know, there may be moments where it's like you have to explain what the power does on any card.
Right.
But it's just a little bit of a half step down. And it was not originally what I wanted, right? When Via Magica was announced, I was a little like, no, like, Rise of Augustus is so close to something that could be in my top 50, to be honest. Probably near the back. Let's be clear. Near the back of the top 50. I enjoy Via Magica. I was reading through a review on Board Game Geek, and I loved. It's like 10 out of 10, and the only comment is amazing game to be played with children, which sounds like an insult, but it's not. You can play it on BGA, and I would encourage people to try it, but just remember that the high highs, the moments of the joy you won't get the same as if you're reaching into a bag and kind of declaring it to the other gamers at the table. That is via Magica or, Rise of Augustus, if you're interested. And we do have Ecos and the expansion, so I know that's something that we've been trying to get to the table. And that is via Magica, designed by Paolo Mori. Mark, tell us about Alma Mater.
Alma Mater is designed by the team of, and they're known collectively as Achitaka, I guess is their team name. I guess our team name is Board Game Barrage, so they can have a team name too. But that design group consists of Flaminia Brasini, Virginio Gili, Stefano Luperto, and Antonio Tinto. Two of those folks, Brasini and Gili, were the designers of Coimbra, which is the spiritual predecessor to Alma Mater, shares the same color palette as that game, shares some of the same DNA as well. And also, those two, Brasini and Gili, as well as Simone Luciani, were the designers of Lorenzo El Magnifico. So it almost feels like a trio of games there. And so Alma Mater is the latest of that trio. Alma Mater is a game that is set in, as Kellen mentioned, the academia theme. I think you're playing competing universities, trying to hire the best professors and do the most research to make your university most prestigious and getting the best students. The way this manifests itself in the game is in a worker placement game with sort of three general places to put your workers in general. There are some extra ones, but in general, there's three places you're going to be devoting your workers to. One is this set of students. So you're going to be taking on students and putting them on your personal player board to mostly enhance what other abilities do. You're placing these students to make your ability to do stuff stronger. Another spot on the board is the professors. You can take on professors, which will give you a once per round game-breaking power that you can sort of tap once per round, and then every round they untap and you can use them again. And finally, there is a research track. This research track is randomly generated every game, so there's a lot of variability there. Actually, there's quite a bit of variability in the game in general as far as the types of professors that can come out, the types of cards that make up the research track, as well as I think they're called adjuncts, which I'll get into in a second. Anyway, the research track is sort of one of the main cruxes of the game. You are trying to travel up this research track because every time you get to the top of one of the sections of the track, you get a bonus. More importantly, though, and this is sort of the most interesting aspect of the game, is that at the end of every round, whatever university is highest on this research track, their books become the most prestigious. And this is something that is recalculated at the end of every round. Whoever is highest on the track, their book is the most prestigious. Whoever is lowest on the track, their book is least prestigious. Then for the next round, the different books are worth more or less depending on how prestigious they are. So, for example, when it comes to taking on students, the way you take on students is you put your worker on the corresponding spot and then you pay a number of books. For example, a student may require 2 of the most prestigious books and then 2 of any book in the second and third most prestigious level. So to get a lot of things you want in this game, you have to get the most prestigious books. It's going to be the most valuable resource. And the way that you get them, because again, if I'm playing against Kellen and Neelan's highest up on the track, I want to get some of Neelan's book because in this round, his books are worth the most. So you can either take a spot on the board to get like one of an opponent's books, but more commonly what you want to do is actually buy the books from your opponents. So there's a spot on the board that allows you to buy books from your opponent's supply.
What if I say, no, I won't sell?
You cannot say no. This is academia.
Oh, that's thematic.
That's right, exactly. The knowledge is for everybody, Kellen. So that's the most interesting aspect of the game. You know, you want to go up this track because you want your books to be most valuable, but even if your books are most valuable, you do need the other players' books as well. And so what's the best way to go about getting them?
Is that, Mark, that you're hoping to sort of not be the most intelligent person in the room so everyone doesn't buy your books, or you are hoping to do that so that they buy all your books so you have all the money? Does it depend?
There's definitely no drawback to being the highest up this track and having the most prestigious books, because your books are going to be most valuable, and yes, you're going to be most attractive for people to come in and buy your books and therefore give you money. When people buy your books, not only are they getting your books, but they could potentially get some victory points. It's sort of a minor aspect, but there is another incentive to buy somebody else's books. You're going to get, in addition to the books, victory points as well. So you're doing this for 6 rounds, And at the end, there's a lot of things that will score points. You get points for however far you are on the research track. You score points for basically how many students you have, for professors that give you victory points. There's a lot of ways to get points, and there's a lot of points that come up in the end of the game. And that's basically how the game works. I was a latecomer to Lorenzo, El Magnifico, and I was also late in playing Coimbra. I enjoy both of those games. And so I was excited to play Alma Mater, and I think Alma Mater is a solid game. I just don't think it's as good as either of those two games. A thing about Coimbra and Lorenzo that I really enjoy is your engine getting really fun. You can buy cards or pick up cards in these other games, and you get your own engine, a very specific to you engine, and it just feels like you're getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And that happens in Alma Mater when you're picking up professors and when you're picking up students, but I feel like the students are more or less going to be the same among all players, so you don't feel like you're getting that much of an edge there. You're not that much different there. And the professors are sort of hard to acquire, so there's not that much of like I'm doing my own thing there. You do have your own player power to start the game, and you can unlock the ability to get other player powers, which is sort of interesting. But again, these are player powers that are sort of open to everyone. It doesn't have that wild engine building thing that I think you get in Lorenzo and Coimbra that I was hoping for. Another thing is, and this is not such an issue for me, but I can see where people would be turned off by this, but it's very important to go up this tech track that I was talking about. But this game is a rather tight one when it comes to resources, be it money or be it other players' books specifically. And every step of the way up this tech track costs resources, and resources that are often hard to come by. There's always a way to like sort of go up the track without paying resources, but that's like quite a valuable spot. So a lot of times you're going to be like just scrounging for that one book you need or for a couple more dollars that you need just to go up this tech track. And again, the tech track, you get a reward every time you get up one of the sections of it, but it just feels like sort of a grind. Not grindy, but it just feels like, oh, I got to get $2 more to move up one step of the track. It's a tightness that I sort of like, but it's not tight in the way that I like games to be tight. It's more of like I need to squeeze out every resource just to move up one step here.
And did you feel like over the course of the game that felt like the overwhelming like feeling, like that was just like wearing you down, like constantly just like having to like inch your way up this?
Yes and no. That is always something you're thinking about. You're always looking at the tech track and saying, okay, the next 2 steps, I need so-and-so book, or I need to have some number of students, and am I going to be able to get that organically, or do I need to focus my resources on being able to go on one of the worker placement spots that allows me to do that for free, basically? And so it's something that's always on your mind. It's something you always have to be sort of considerate of.
Mark, why have we not spoken about plastic book tokens yet?
Oh, yes. Let me talk about plastic book tokens. Thank you, Neelan. This game has, for all its faults, has probably my component of the year so far. I'm going to say it right here. These book tokens that each player has.
BGB component of the year.
To be fair, it is only April.
That's true. That's fair. Okay. But each player has books of their color, of their player color, and they're like these little plastic books, but the thing that makes them great is that they have like a white strip to sort of look like pages, and they're just great. I mean, they're great book components. They're the best book components I've ever seen in a board game.
The white strip really sold me.
I mean, it's a little touch, but it makes all the difference in the world. I dare you to go onto the Alma Mater page of BGG and look at these little books and think they're not the cutest thing in the world.
I can't think of another game that's aesthetically got a book type feel to it that could possibly be better than book tokens in Alma Mater.
Shut your mouth, you. So that is Alma Mater. I think if you are a fan of Coimbra and Lorenzo, I think you'll probably be drawn to it and want to give it a shot. I just don't think that it does the things that those games do as well. And I don't think it's necessarily going for it, but it's going for it enough, I think, that it just pales a little bit in comparison. It's a fine game. It's a totally solid Euro, but just not, I think, as good as those two, so you might as well play one of those two, in my opinion. So that is Alma Mater by Flaminia Brazzini, Virginio Gili, Stefano Laperto, and Antonio Tinto. They all come together to form the design group Achitoka, which is cool.
Like Voltron.
That's right.
So before we get to today's featured topic, we do have a little announcement. I think
Little
turn it
announcement?
well, I didn't want to. We're turning it over to Neelan, who has done all of the work for the announcement. I asked to make the announcement. He said no. He must make the announcement. All right, Neelan, make your little announcement.
So, I mean, I think first and foremost, this was being a pretty big group effort. Like, it was Mark's idea conceptually, and we kind of ran with this idea. Wait, what?
Is it group effort? Here's what Mark did. Now I'm going to tell you what
exactly.
I did. I thought,
a group effort. Kellen was
idea,
cheering
yeah.
us along while I took Mark's
Okay,
idea and ran with it for the duration. So basically, this was a Neelan effort with some support from Mark and Kellen. Thank you, guys. But we're proud to announce the Board Game Barrage Wiki. This now exists and is live at boardgamebarrage.com/wiki. And as with all good wikis, we don't really know what this is going to be. It is up to you and the community and everyone to kind of just fill it in whatever you feel it needs to be. At the core, it is every episode of the show, every game linked to every episode, so you can very easily reference games back to the episodes that we spoke about them. But those game pages are sort of blank canvases. If you want to put up photos that you've taken of your plays of the games, little tidbits of information about the game, or like points of information about where we may have had something interesting to say about that game, that is up to you. It's up to the community. You can create your own community page and kind of run with it. We have a section where you can add interesting notes about episodes, like jokes or features that you liked about it. We're going to be populating this as we go with every episode as it comes out and linking those back up to the pages, but the rest is pretty much a blank canvas. That's up to you. So that is there now. Please go to boardgamebarrage.com/wiki and just feel around. If you've ever used like Wikipedia or anything like that, that's kind of what this is.
I'm super excited about this. I think this is going to be super cool because our community has like consistently blown me away by how like clever and fun and interesting and welcoming they are. And I just think setting them free upon a wiki is going to be amazing
and creative as well, right? Like,
yes,
and
absolutely.
this is, like I said, like, it's just, you can make this whatever you want it to be.
yeah, there's been a lot of cool events that have popped up in Board Game Barrage land on the Discord, like Ghost Turkey, BG Beer of the Week, and many other customs and traditions of the Discord. And so if you want to make a page that sort of codifies that, you can now do that, which I think is really cool. So thank you, Mark, for that tremendous idea.
Wait,
You
what?
got it anytime.
And now on to today's featured topic, which is a game, as all good things are. And that game is design problem or player problem. So we've outlined 3 situations in board gaming that we'll explain briefly. We will argue about them as to whether those are design problems or player problems. When we get to the end of a section, we must definitively declare, with no asterisks, whether it is a design problem or a player problem. I think that Neelan will be trying to add buts, Mark will be trying to add asterisks, but no, that is not how the game works. It is design problem or player problem. I will start us off with the first one, and that is player elimination. I think this is perhaps the easiest one to explain. If you've ever played a board game that has player elimination, that is where a player can be kicked out of the game. They are no longer playing. It is worse than skip a turn in Uno. It is you are out of the game. Is this a design problem or a player problem? I believe that player elimination is maligned and misunderstood. And the first point that I want to make, that I just want to throw out there and see what you guys think, there is a difference that needs to be clarified between something that makes a great board game and something that is a great board game for a board game night. Okay? That there is a difference between a good board game to play at a board game night and a great board game. How do you feel about that?
I buy that, although I think that is a very thin line.
I agree. I get what you're trying to say, and I think that what player elimination allows for is big moments that in the right context can be the defining point of an event type experience, or, you know, like a night built around, say, a game. But yes, you're right. In the context of a board game night, this all changes and gets weirder. But I think, like Mark said, I think the line is so thin as to be kind of not that significant. Because the crux of this, to me, is that it is a mechanic that is forcing you to no longer play the game. You said in the framing of this question, like maybe half-jokingly, that it's worse than missing a turn. I agree with that wholeheartedly. The mechanic we're defending here is do not play the game anymore.
Yeah, you're out. Get lost, sucker. Player elimination, Neelan, raises the stakes, right? The emotional highs go to new levels.
I agree with that.
Okay? What you're wanting to do is to Stonemaier the game. You want to cut off the low, but you're also sacrificing the high in order to do that.
To an extent, yes. I think that I will absolutely
Your asterisk?
No, I will wholeheartedly agree that there is a danger in shaving off the highs and the lows of a game, but there is also the other extreme of this, that not all highs are in service of the game as a whole. You could have like a rule that is like, you're now allowed to like jump up and flip the table and punch the person in the face. And that would be a high moment, but it wouldn't be a good game design decision. Like, you don't want your highest highs to necessarily be the defining moment of a game's experience for someone, which in the case of early player elimination often is. Oh, well, this is the game where I set out after 10 minutes.
Neelan's bad at werewolf, is what he's revealing. But there's a difference, right, between niche game design. Like, in order to make the argument that player elimination is a design problem, you would have to make the argument that design, by its nature, is to include the maximum amount of people that it possibly can. That's like a design goal. And I'm okay if that's your design goal. But to say that player elimination is not like a niche mechanic that some people would enjoy, I feel like those are sort of competing with each other here.
But, I mean, nobody enjoys, I think, the mechanic of player elimination.
Here we go. Skull. Okay? Skull is a fantastic bluffing game, okay, with player elimination, where you as a player, as you lose health and life, your options get more and more limited, and you literally become desperate to the point that if you have one chip left and it's your rose, all you can do is bet. Like, the game actually removes all your choices. It gets to your turn, you can't raise the stakes because you've got one token left. So the only thing that could happen is you could win or you could lose, you could bust. And so as the game progresses, your health declines and you get out. And that moment is allowed because your options go away and your panic rises.
Sure.
So the classic counter argument that I'll make for you guys, because you're speechless right now, is that, okay, player elimination works, but only in short games.
Or,
yes.
Or in specific contexts, right? Because I don't mind player elimination if it's like always designed to happen towards the end of the game. Like, Secret Hitler is a game I've mentioned that does this well. Like, the player elimination can only happen in the last 20% of the game, last third of a game. That feels smart to me. You've raised the stakes at the appropriate, like, emotional crescendo of the game, and then you're sitting out for 10 minutes at best.
Right.
I understand that there is, like, a flip side to this, which is like, okay, if you don't eliminate someone from the game and they're just participating in it without feeling like they can win, that's not great either. I just don't think that elimination is the right design decision to fix that problem.
I agree with that.
The food chain magnate argument.
Right. Food Chain Magnate strikes me as a game that would in some way benefit from player elimination, or some way to, like, hurry the end of a game where the outcome is clear. How you do that is difficult, and having player elimination in Food Chain Magnate doesn't seem like a great way out of it, but there are games of Food Chain Magnate where, you know you're in for a 2-hour game and 20 minutes into it, 30 minutes into it that you're out of it. So where would you rather be eliminated, or would you rather slog through it? That is
okay, but that's great. Let's take your sentence, run it back. So play it again right now for
I'll
me.
double
Mr.
it. I'll play it
Mark,
twice.
the editor. Okay, perfect. And then edit me screaming design problem, because that's what you just identified in Food Chain Magnate. Player elimination is not a design problem, but what you just said is.
What is that? There is no player elimination, is what you're saying?
That you can get 30 minutes into a 2-hour game and have no chance of winning, but you have to sit there the whole time.
But
That's a
That
design
all hinges on if you think player elimination is the right solution in the case of something like a food chain magnate.
No.
then your argument means nothing, because player elimination is still not the correct design solution.
Obviously, everything we're saying is subjective. We did not set that out at the beginning, but please. Anyone have any closing thoughts on player elimination? I honestly, if you both don't immediately vote player problem, you have not presented your arguments well. Let me just say that
I don't know how you could possibly come to that conclusion.
Look, for me, what it comes down to, when I ask myself this question, if it's a player problem or a game design problem, is how would I feel if this mechanism was no longer a mechanism you could have in games? Would I be okay with this mechanism being scrubbed off of the face of the earth when it comes to game design? And for me, player elimination I'd be okay with it being gone.
100% agree.
I think it does heighten things. I think it's a nice spice, but it's a spice that I can live without.
You're ruining diplomacy. You're ruining Twilight.
I didn't ruin diplomacy.
Well, I always win, so.
I think diplomacy sort of is a exception because that's basically what the game's about, is being eliminated and trying to stave off being eliminated. But in general, if you're saying live in a world without elimination or live in a world with elimination.
Okay, good. You talked, so now that I can formulate my good rebuttal. So your argument is essentially, right, that would I be okay if this mechanic was removed from the universe? Okay.
Yeah.
So notice a big focus on the word I, me. Very selfish. I'm serious. Actually, a very selfish perspective, which is to say, like, is this a niche game design mechanism that many players could enjoy? Like, you shouldn't be voting on this based on, like, oh, it's a design problem because I don't like it. I don't think that that's really a valid way of interpreting this. It's like, if there's a group of players that could like it, it's okay. You don't like playing hopscotch, but you don't think that that's a game design problem.
Right. Okay. So
okay. What's an example of a board game mechanism that you just don't like? Like roll and write, right? You don't particularly like roll and write games.
Right.
You'd probably be okay if roll and write games went away. Ergo, you're about to vote that roll and write games are a design problem.
What I would say is I think that player elimination hurts more games than it helps, maybe, is what I'm saying.
Right.
It's a net negative in board games.
Totally. And to make this as like even non-specific as possible, I would say with some confidence, in fact, that most people do not enjoy being eliminated from a game. Or that the experience, that the possibility of player elimination, right, that tension, that I do agree is the specific emotion that it's trying to evoke, does not outweigh the feeling when you get eliminated from a game, which is generally, okay, that sucks. I can think of two distinct examples, like where Mark was eliminated from a 3-hour game and just left, and it's like, that's not what you want.
Could be. All right. I think we've heard all the arguments for and against player elimination, so we will start with Neelan. Player elimination, is it a design problem or a player problem?
I think it's a design problem. I think that there are games that solve player elimination. They take the same game and like come up with an alternative to player elimination that works. And you wouldn't need to do that if player elimination wasn't fundamentally broken to begin with.
Mark, I'm rolling my eyes. We have to keep going. There were so many buts in that sentence. Player elimination, design problem or player problem?
I'm going to say this as a person who generally doesn't mind a little bit of player elimination here and there at all. In fact, I do see it as a spice, but I think it does do more harm to the board gaming hobby than it brings to it, so I'm going to say design problem.
Kellen, player elimination, is it a design problem or is it a player problem? Well, thank you for asking. It's a player problem. No buts or asterisks required. Moving right along. Mark, why don't you talk to us briefly about what an alpha gamer is in co-op and what your feelings are and whether that's a design problem or a player problem.
So the alpha gamer idea when it comes to co-op games is that there is a fear that a player in a game where the players are working against the board or working against the game, that a player will direct everyone to do what they think is the best course of action, and it will lead to the alpha gamer, in the alpha gamer problem, sort of taking over and making the experience worse for everyone else. There are games that try to obfuscate that by keeping communication between the players limited, or by adding a speed component so that communication is limited because you need to do things in a quick amount of time, or a myriad of other ways. But basically what an alpha gamer problem is, somebody is taking over and sort of directing the moves of other players in a co-op game.
So like Pandemic, right, is perhaps the easiest example of a co-op that most people have played, where everything in Pandemic is public, and there is probably an optimal route. And if there's that one person who just wants to call it out on every single turn, no, you should do that, no, you should do that, if you don't do that, you're dumb. Is that a design problem or a player problem?
This is also called quarterbacking.
Yes.
Occasionally. This is one of those ones where I feel like this is a situation, if you've played cooperative games, that you are probably at least a little bit familiar with. I think Mark excellently covered the sort of games that try to capitulate to this a little bit by sort of either making it harder for one player to be able to run the table. And I will always sort of like admire that in a design, but the more I think about this, I still feel like the ultimate root cause of the problem is a behavioral one. It's one of a player acting inappropriately in a social setting, in a shared group setting.
That is precisely what I have written down. You have a problem, not a game problem, in all caps.
And I generally agree with that. However, I think games that don't try to combat the alpha gamer problem, or I don't even want to call it like the alpha gamer problem, but just like the opportunity for the best strategy to be like figured out by one person, is a bad game design. I mean, it's like if a game can be so easily discussed and led by one player, obviously you shouldn't be a jerk and you should let everybody contribute. But if the game presents itself in such a way where like obviously one person can set out the best course of action, that just is a bad game. That's just
okay.
It's like, what are we doing then? Why are we playing this cooperatively if it's sort of like just out there?
I think that's interesting. I think that's interesting, Mark, because like I do think like what you're defining is sort of like this spectrum, right, of games that sort of are easily quarterback versus ones that aren't, right? And I kind of do agree with you that I like a cooperative game that does make it harder to do that. Like I've spoken at length about Spirit Island, for example, is a game that basically, without even like having like ham-fisted means of doing this, like I think limiting communication is one of the easiest sort of like hackneyed solutions to this. But Spirit Island, just by being a complex game where it's very hard for one person to like see the entirety of the problem all on their own, it sort of circumvents this, I think, in a smart way. But I also don't think the low end of the spectrum, the pandemic type games that we're describing, where everything is open and there is potentially an optimal solution, I don't think that those are bad games. I just still feel like the thing that makes them bad is easily sort of remedied by just not wanting to be the person that has to necessarily find the exact correct solution to the problem and dictate it to the table.
And look, I agree with that, and I agree that's the most obvious and most correct and easiest counter to the argument that alpha gaming is a design problem, but there's a flip side to that. Like, there is the jerk who wants to like control everything and say this is the way to do it, but there's also, when everything's open information, there's also the pressure on the lesser players to be like, I don't want to mess up because I'm here with all the information, and what if I make a mistake? I shouldn't make a mistake because the information's here, and what if I suggest something that's dumb? There's a pressure on that player as well when information is so open. So it's like there's negative aspects on both sides of that, on the quieter player who maybe is not knowledgeable or experienced, as well as the aggressive jerk who we all can agree is going to mess up that kind of game, and mess up most games, to be frank.
But you don't think that's kind of just like two sides of the same coin? Like those people are feeling pressured and feeling that tension because of the possibility that someone will think, oh my God, that's dumb. Let's not do that. We'll do this instead, right?
No, well, not exclusively. I think, board games, again, this is coming through my lens, but for me, when I play a board game, I'm there to have fun and all this stuff, but also winning is an important aspect to me. And like the pressure would come from, I'm going to mess it up for us. Regardless of the attitudes, even maybe I might even be more offended or more bothered if people were like coddling me or like being nice. Like even if they're being genuinely nice, like it would bother me to be like, I'm messing this up. Like here's this open information and I'm messing it up. And maybe this is like my player problem, like me being the player problem, but like I just think that's an inherent thing where those games feel like a solo game that having more players is just making things messier.
I actually came into this with a very specific opinion, Mark, and you've changed my mind. It was nothing you said in the last 3 minutes. It's what you said at the very beginning. And this is someone, I'm not really a co-op gamer. I don't particularly like co-op games. But if you hold up at the top of a co-op game as the design goal being cooperation, and then if the game can be solved by one person without cooperating, does that ladder up to the game design goal of literally cooperation? And the answer is no. So I am locking in final answer, design problem.
I mean, look, I'm not going to lie. I think that's a pretty good argument. I think that on the lowest end of the spectrum, where you're describing a game, the thing you said about cuddling is actually the thing that's turning the most me. Because, like, yes, I think in the scenario of playing a game of Pandemic, right, where I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to let you make a mistake and we'll go along with it, right? And not speaking up is in itself not the ideal solution. Like, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of someone not telling me when I'm making an obvious mistake. So yeah, I could be convinced that this is something that is at least partially solvable, or at least has degrees of solvability by, as you said, Kellen, by actually building cooperation or the requirement of cooperation into your design.
And I think some co-op games, obviously do that with limiting conversation and stuff like that. I think those are good ways around it. But if you're giving me a game that is like, Pandemic, where the information is all open, I just am almost instantly turned off just from that. I mean, it just feels like, why are we doing this together? Why not play something where we actually need to all work together?
Yeah, I can't get all the way with you there, Mark, because I still enjoy those games. And I do think that there is a degree of like, yeah, I would do this differently if I was playing this solo, but we're doing this together. And that means we're both going to make choices and make mistakes and live with that as a team.
And yet I'm calling it a design problem. Neelan? What are you going to say?
I could be convinced that this is more of a design problem, but I came in like feeling pretty strongly that this was more of a player problem, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, me too. Literally the only thing I have under this topic is you have a problem. Yeah, okay. So you have convinced me, Mark. But the other thing, right, you can't chat or you can't talk about the specific numbers in your hand, but you can say, I've got a big number.
Yeah.
Like, that's stuff, man. Like, that is, like, annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's varying levels of best fixes, I think, for sure.
I've got a big blue card hiding in my pants. And let us move on to the final question. Design problem or player problem? Kingmaking. Neelan, can you define kingmaking for us? Probably the hardest one to define.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. I think kingmaking is typically when a game frequently leads to moments, typically towards the end of the game, where one player has the agency, or at least the power, to determine who the winner is. Not in a way that actually affects necessarily their standing in the game, but, if I take this action, then Mark will win, or if I take this action, then Kellen will win. That is a king-making scenario where one player without any stakes in the win will determine who the winner is. And some games enable that more frequently than others.
So I would say that it's tough. There are games where king-making is almost like a mechanic, like it's almost like part of the game. I'm thinking primarily, obviously, of negotiation games. And it's tough when you're playing a non-negotiation game where you get in a king-making situation knowing what to do. Like, you're playing a straight down the line Euro, there's no negotiating, and you find yourself in a situation where your decision is going to decide who wins the game, even if you're not involved in that. But I think that those situations, the way you have to play them is trying to do the best for yourself. If you're in a situation where if I take the action, Kellen's going to win. If I don't take the action, Neelan's going to win. The way you should answer that question is, if it's not a negotiation game where sort of all bets are off in those cases, you should be playing it to maximize your position, either to move up the rank, even like to finish as high as possible, or, there's situations where you want to take an action or an inaction where you're not likely to move up, but if everything goes your way, you're going to win the game. Take that home run swing. I think that's what is asked of a player in that situation. And so therefore, I think while it's a bad spot to be in, I think if you just play games that way where you're trying to do best for yourself, leads me to believe that kingmaking is a player problem more than a design problem.
I think that one of the things that I've always misunderstood about kingmaking is there's no doubt that kingmaking on the last turn of the game can feel bad. There's no question about that. But a lot of moments of kingmaking adjacent, or it depends on how you define kingmaking, happen literally the entire game. One of the things I hate is in like some small card game, and it's 4 players, but there's only 3 resources, right? And so player 1 gets resource A, player 2 gets resource B, player 3 gets resource C, and then player 4 has to pick one of the 3 resources that came before, and then they're going to be competing over that resource for the rest of the game. And if you looked at some sort of like math thing, Neelan, I don't know what kind of math thing, you tell me.
No, that's what we call them, math things.
a math tree of what that did to both of those players' chances of winning, predominantly like that would be the moment where their chances went down the most. And that happened on the first round of a game. We're so fixated on this like last moment where it's like, well, I can't win on this turn, but what actually led to you being in that situation, it's not the game that has put you there. It's the amount of agency that the game allowed. All throughout the course of the game, your chance of winning was going down and down and down. Ergo, for the most part, I believe this is a player problem.
I think that everything you're saying is valid, but there's kind of like an emotional core to this, right? Which, yeah, you could absolutely...
To math?
Math is pure emotion, basically. But to the even idea of Kingmaking, because I think you're absolutely right. It's like you could easily be the person that is inadvertently giving a benefit to a specific player earlier in the game. And as with most board games, early resources lead to bigger games in the long run. So you have potentially been Kingmaking much earlier in the game than matters. But it doesn't feel emotionally like that. Where this like comes to the fore is at the end of the game where your decision picks a winner, and that does feel emotionally different. That said, I think part of the fabric of this question is something that Mark alluded to, which is this idea that, and this might be actually a very board game barrage thing, right? This idea that we treat these as negotiations some of the time. And this discussion, especially in the highlights of the games where this has come up for us, longtime listeners will remember the Rising Sun incident as a good example of this. And like the core of that was a fight, a negotiation, like a try to appeal to Mark's better judgment that this wasn't the right thing to do. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to be in the fabric of every game group, but it's a very important part of the fabric of ours. Ergo, I think this is a player problem. And if you come into situations where you are beat up over a king-making scenario, you should evaluate everything about the social dynamic that led to that position as to why you feel that. Because I do feel like part of the important proceedings to this is like, how did I treat this player through the game? Did I attack them often? Did I help them often? That sort of thing. All of that is part of like the social construct of your game, and you should be punished for it in the long run if it ends up being a decision between two players, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I think that there is this sort of desire for a state where the open nature of interaction is allowed at the beginning of the game, and that somehow by the end that will have like been stripped away, and so the smartest player at the table is going to win, But some of our favorite games, like Cthulhu Wars, if one player starts the game and just starts attacking one other player, neither of those two players are going to win, and you don't call that king-making, you just call it, again, a problem. But the game allows you to do that, and that can lead to king-making, but the alternative is far worse, where you're not allowed to interact, and you're sort of gated the entire time. With that said, the emotional moment where you get got, or where Mark makes an erroneous decision, can feel pretty painful.
Totally.
Player problem.
One of the things I can't help but think about when we talk about king-making, we had a discussion with Quinns, I'm shut up and sit down, about the way he likes to play Inish. And this idea is that there is this sort of like shared idea at the end of the game who's most deserving of winning the game by virtue of the merits of how they played the game over the course of it, which almost like enters a sort of like a light role-playing territory. And we've never really approached Inish with that mindset, but I think that's such a fascinating to think about king-making in general. This idea that if a game boils down to that situation, that there is a larger grained like evaluation of the player and who deserves it more.
I love Quinns. I am so against I am revolted.
You're not. Okay.
But
Mark,
the deserving is like...
Listen.
Okay. Tell me.
In the meta-ness of our game group, okay, what can we all get behind but that Kellen must lose the game? Like, really, like if we want to take this from board game to meta board gaming, I would say that like winning the game is number one for all of us. And then the collective board game barrage POV outside of me is Kellen must lose. And that is built into the fabric of how we play it. And I think that's what he's getting at. I understand why that, like, my eyes were kind of wide when this was being told to us, but it's still built into what we do, whether we like explicitly think about it that way or not.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of so we're playing a game. Let's take Inish, for example, because this is the complaint I have with Inish without the expansion, is because it gets to a bash later thing. And like, I would never just say, okay, this is dragging on too long. I'm going to give it to Nealon because I don't want Kellen to win. I would never.
Oh, really?
Did
you listen to episode 7 about Rising Sun?
I was trying to win that game. I was trying to win that game.
No, you weren't.
I was 100% trying to win that game. That feels like anti-board gaming to me, to be honest. Like, I don't know. It's antithetical to like my competitive spirit. I just it feels disgusting, honestly. Just like I don't want to do it.
Well, I mean, quick question to you then, Mark. Like, I think you articulated well this idea about advancing your own position. What if that's not a factor? What if you have to pick between two people and neither decision advances your own position in the game? What would you do?
He's already said he'd get rid of me. He says this over and over again.
But it's hard for me to accept that that's a position. You're saying that a position where either aspect does nothing for me?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't happen.
That can happen.
It's where you're in fourth place.
And doing anything
cannot calculate.
Yeah, and doing anything cannot advance you to third.
But can anything give me more points?
Well, like in a game like Inish, there are no points, broadly speaking, right?
Right. Okay, if I'm in that position, the first thing I'm trying to do is advance my rank or advance my points or give me something that will give me some shot to win the game or some shot to advance. But absent all that, I think what I would do is the inactive move.
Rest.
Yeah, I would just step back. I'm not saying that I don't attack Kellen. He's like my number one target. For sure. I mean, I have said I feel like a rivalry with Kellen when it comes to competitive games. For sure. But I would not give a game to someone else so that Kellen would lose. Like, that's not what a board game is to me. That's not what competition is. That's like cheating to me in some way. It's like against the spirit of what board games are. It's like so antithetical to me.
His magic circle. Have you not listened to episode 5 of our podcast, Mark?
I have, and everybody should. That is one of the best ones out there.
Mark, I don't agree with you, which is to say that making the non-move in a game does inadvertently help someone, right? Because if you're right next to someone else, other players have built up their forces based on you being competitive in that land. So when you make the non-move, then someone else gets an easier grab at territory, which is why, to me, you want to end it with who has wronged me the most. And I would say that I would wait in this game above in our rivalry, but like that I'm okay with either, and that wouldn't be my first or second choice. But even points for me, it's like relative position is what I care about, which is interesting. So we are running long, but let us go around the horn. Kingmaking, player problem, or design problem? I will say player problem.
I think it's a player problem.
Player problem.
Oh, we agree on something. It's a great way to end this. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to the Board Game Barrage podcast. Thanks to everyone who voted for us again in the Board Game Geek Golden Geek competition. You can chat with us about these things. We want to hear your answers to these questions. Design problem or player problem for all of these. We're going to be discussing that on boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. We have a lovely community of well over 1,000 people. Please come join and chat with us. We will be debating this for months. I can feel it now. If you want to contribute to the wiki, you can do that at boardgamebarrage.com/wiki. You can make anything you want. Asterisk, we will look. So
it will be moderated. Yes, very important.
It will be moderated. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the Board Game Geek Guild, the Facebook page, the Facebook group. We're everywhere that you want to be. Thanks, as always, to Heart Society for their song, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album, Wake the Queens. Thank you so much for listening. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
And the follow-up to Coimbra.
Oh, I don't think I knew that. That's cool.
Oh.
Oh.
Oh. The follow-up to Coimbra. Oh.
I'm glad you're as excited as I am, Callan.
Yeah, because your sorry ass sold Coimbra before I got to Coimbra. I wanted to.